proceed. Thank you.
All right, no problem. I'll provide you a brief outline of what Kristine and I will be talking about today. First, I'll provide background describing this adaptive approach that we're referring to. Talk about the benefits from a landscape level perspective. Now, I'll turn sharing over to Kristine, and she will take over and talk about benefits from the local level perspective. And then finally, Kristine will talk about progressing. Are we achieving our goals that we intended as we utilize this adaptive approach? First of all, this adaptive approach we're referring to is titled our Native Prairie Adaptive Management Program, or you'll hear Kristine and I say NPAM is our acronym for this, and serve as the NPAM coordinator. Just a little bit of an introduction. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Wildlife Refuge System in the Northern Great Plains, and specifically the pothole region. This is the green polygon here represents the prairie pothole region. This area provides an important conservation reservoir of remaining native prairie. And I say native prairie, I'm talking about our tidal pieces of land that we manage that have never been cultivated or broken up. So across this area, specifically in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and into Minnesota, we have upwards, I would say, of about 300,000 acres of native prairie that are under our purview to manage and conserve. So these prairies have a common management history of long-term rest from about 1935 to 1985. And that means through those years, we didn't do a lot of defoliation such as burning and grazing. At the time, we believed that it was best for the wildlife that we were managing to rest these prairies. So about early 2000s to 2008, those of us in North Dakota, South Dakota, and northeastern Montana with Fish and Wildlife Service decided we really need to do a status check on our prairies. So we set out to survey every prairie over 10 acres in North Dakota, South Dakota, and northeastern Montana, equating to over 220,000 acres. And these are results of that. The y-axis is percent frequency. The x-axis is our plant grouping. As you see, we were pretty overwhelmed by the outcomes of this survey. Bluegrass and smooth brome, our introduced cool seed grasses, are making up more than 50% of the composition of our prairies. And unfortunately, our native grass and forbs take up less than 25% of our prairies. It was pretty eye-opening for us and really helped us see that we have a major problem on our prairies, and this helped us to frame our problem, and it literally gave us a spark to figure out what we can do to improve our prairies. And we knew we wanted to do it collaboratively and felt a sense of urgency to do something. So there's a traditional research effort that we can use to look at the problem that we had determined these introduced cool season grasses, or we came upon this idea of using an adaptive management approach, which embraces learning value to the extent that it improves management. The spectrum lays this out nicely. On this side, there's research, which typically has a focus on learning, and research is something important to us that we still do on a regular basis. And on the end of the spectrum is management, where we focus on outcomes. So sometimes if I burn a prairie, I might go out and just walk across it and make opinion in my head of how I think that prairie responded to management. So what we really wanted to do when we realized we could do this using adaptive approach is we wanted to take a hybrid of these two, really merge them together. So use adaptive management, which is a focus on outcomes on a path illuminated by learning. So really bring that science and really make it apply to management. So able to successfully do that, and so with this adaptive approach, we started a Native Prairie Adaptive Management Program, or our acronym is NPAM, that you'll use. This will represent a year in the life of NPAM. So first of all, we burn, graze, or we rest. if you recall, as I said early on, that most of the prairies have a long-term history of rest, which in part we believe is the reason for a lot of that invasion of that smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass that I showed you on the figure earlier. So with NPAM, we're really being pretty aggressive with our burning and grazing. What we were able to do with this adaptive approach is come up with a standardized monitoring protocol that all of us who are Fish and Wildlife Service are enrolled in this program can use. And that's important so that we can evaluate our management the same way. So we monitor, and then we developed this standardized centralized database, which this is where the Plains and Prairie Potholes LCC really helped us in the startup to make sure we could develop this database, which is really critical. And I know Kristine's going to hit on this a little bit too, but we haven't always been great record keepers in the past. So this is really a huge thing that we're able to do this. So we put all data into this database. Then have this decision tool that our data feeds. And this decision tool was developed by our USGS partners. And what our USGS partners did is they sat several of us down from Fish and Wildlife Service, and they told us, they said, literally lay out your mental models or your hypotheses on how you think your prairies of varying composition are responding to things like burning and grazing. So they literally pulled that information out of our heads, and they were able to develop it up into this structured quantitative tool that essentially testing our hypotheses every year based on the real-world data we're getting from our annual management and monitoring. And that decision tool actually produces management recommendations based on those hypotheses that are built in there, as well as the real-world information that is being fed into that decision tool on an annual basis. So essentially, simply put, with our decision tool, as we know better, we learn, and then we do better. So that's what's happening on the annual basis. Essentially, our decision tool, our hypotheses are being tested, and that decision tool is actually learning to help develop these management recommendations. What is a very brief background on what our Native Prairie Adaptive Management Program is. Kristine and I really wanted to spend some time talking about our different perspectives in terms of participation. So I serve as the program coordinator for NPAM, meaning I do all the background work to keep it really the operations type of work. I'm going to give my perspective, which of course at a landscape level. So first of all, this is a similar slide you've seen earlier that shows the spatial area of our Native Prairie Adaptive Management Program. And we have about forests involved, 2 U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regions, Region 6 and Region 3, which is separated by that red line. We have mixed and tallgrass prairie, which is represented by this yellow dashed line. Of course, the mixed on the west, tallgrass on the east. Each of these purple dots represents a management unit that's enrolled in NPAM, which each of these units essentially is part of the data that's put into that annual feedback loop that I showed you on the previous slide. We average about 120 management units a year, give or take. The biggest benefits of folks participating in this is the ability to receive landscape level benefits with minimal input. As you can see, the folks over here in Benton Lake and Great Falls, Montana, they only have 2 units enrolled, which people have anywhere from 2 to say about 10 units enrolled. But even if 2 units, you're receiving the benefits of all 120 units or however many units that respective year that are enrolled. So folks getting that big picture benefit as they're getting real-time results for their individual units. Remember, they enter their annual management and monitoring information into that database, and then they receive those real-time results specific for individual units. So zooming a little bit, this is that year in the life of NPAM slide that I showed you a little bit earlier, and this is just to demonstrate the landscape level benefits a bit further. So this database that we developed, this is managed at my level, myself, and we have our database manager that literally once folks enter their information into the database, we take care of it. We take care of all archiving, and we take care of disk scrubbing, everything like that that's necessary in managing this. This is an earth-shattering thing. As I stated earlier, we haven't always been the best record keepers in the past. Also, the decision tool is totally maintained at my level, at this big picture level. Analysis is done at my level as well, between me and our database manager. So all of this, the participants in the project, the local level, which Kristine will talk about, this is all dealt with at my level, and folks don't need to be concerned with these sorts of things on a daily basis. Every year, folks have all their information entered into the NPAM database by about the last week in August, and within about 5 days, myself and our database manager process the information in the database and in the decision tool and provide management recommendations for the subsequent year. The picture benefit I want to share with you all is how NPAM has really leveraged partnerships. I have several of these listed here just as examples. I have talked about the Plains and Prairie Potholes. LCC has really, building that database was fundamental to the success of NPAM, so that's been huge. And so our friends at USD, U.S. Department of Agriculture, specifically the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Agriculture Research Service have been very involved with helping us from the get-go, and specifically recently they've been figure out how we can add ecological site descriptions into our decision tool, and also helping us look retrospectively at how ecological sites might differ with our management actions and the outcomes. Again, partners have been side by side with us from the beginning, from the development, but they've also done some other projects, including a grassland songbird project where we rated the units, all of our NPAM units, to look at birds we're responding to are pretty regular and aggressive management. Also, our USGS partners have helped us look retrospectively at some of our accumulated NPAM data to look at how things like precipitation are affecting the outcomes of our management. North Dakota State University and South Dakota State University down here have been able to have some graduate projects, some targeted graduate projects to address some of our specific data gaps. North Dakota State University did a management response, a more deep analysis of our prairies, really to look to validate that our monitoring protocol is appropriate, and really look more specifically on how plants are physiologically responding to things like burning. Bluegrass genetics, essentially through NDSU's work, we've been able to look at that genetics doesn't appear to be a factor in Kentucky bluegrass spreading. And finally, this brome phenology project, which has involved NDSU and South Dakota State University, has been critical, really, as we for our decision tool, how we try to target the timing of our management. Okay, I am going to hand sharing over to Kristine and let her take over. Okay. Kristine.
This is all technology, but I think I got it. Okay. I'm a biologist. I've been at the Tewaukon Wildlife Refuge for a lot of years, and this has really been an exciting project, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that benefit here at a local level, our station. Just want to kind of give you first off a little context of where we're located. So you can see down here in southeast North Dakota, this is the Tewaukon Refuge Complex, and we have a refuge, which is about a little over 8,000 acres. We also have a wetland management district, which is a little over 14,000 acres of waterfowl production areas. What I thought I would do today is just kind of walk through an example, one of our NPAM units, and see if that helps clarify some of the things that are going on at the local level. I'm going to use my example today is the Krause waterfowl production area. It's located in Sargent County. We're in the tallgrass prairie, and we are also dominated, the landscape is dominated by agriculture. So there's not a lot of the native prairie left down in our part of the world, but we do have some nice examples of some prairie still left. So I was going to do this one. It's kind of a typical example of one of our prairies. Yes.
Can I interrupt you? I'm actually not seeing your slides on the screen.
You're not? Well, yeah, that's not good.
No, I'm not either, Kristine. This is Rick.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I hesitated to interrupt you.
That's fine.
I was doing something wrong on my end.
Yeah,
so.
I thought the same.
Is that better or is that not right?
Did you see your screen?
I thought I did. Here, just a minute. Let me go
Sometimes
back.
there's also a lag.
Yeah, something's not. So I'm okay. There we go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
See,
there you go.
It was me pushing
there
the wrong.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you.
No, thank you, because I'm just babbling on. Okay. How's that? Does that work? Can I see that?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Yes. Good,
yes.
yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. This is the Krause waterfowl production area, and this will be my example. The Krause waterfowl production area, purchased in 1972 with migratory bird funding, it's right adjacent to the refuge, and is a really nice example. It had about 96 acres, was native prairie, never broken. It was a pasture really that the landowner had before we purchased it, and he used it as a season-long grazing. And the rest of the acres was cropland, and when we purchased it, we planted it back to a monotypic stand of warm season natives, and we added a tree belt, which was kind of typical back then of what Fish and Wildlife Service did. The WPA has silty loam soils, and there are a lot, if you can tell, there's a lot of temporary, seasonal, and semi-permanent wetlands on the unit. But I'll focus for the PAM discussion on those 96 acres of native prairie, which are mostly located on the western part here of the waterfowl production area. Just a little background, historical management on this unit was pretty much single species management. Since it was purchased for duck production, the management was to rest. So we wanted to provide dense nesting cover type vegetation for ducks, so we didn't do a lot of management. Spring fire were periodic and not utilized hardly at all, and had long extended periods of rest. We also did, as Cami mentioned, did not do a very good job of documenting any of our management. We didn't document whether we grazed it. We didn't document how many cows, how long they were on it. Might have been some reference in a narrative or something that there might have been grazing. It wasn't done on a very intensive method. So we don't have a lot, and there was no vegetative monitoring on these sites. What we noticed over time is that there was an increase in invasive vegetation, including smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass. It's pretty indicative on most of our native prairie down in this area. This kind of rest management or no management, and this invasion is pretty typical of our waterfowl production areas on this area. So we joined with the other Fish and Wildlife Service stations in participating in the PAM in 2009 because we were concerned about the state of our native prairie. So we went out and we monitored all our native prairie tracts that were over 10 acres in size, and we found that they were all moderately to and likely more highly invaded by one or both of the invasive grasses. And so we selected 7 management units for the program, including some of our best, with some really nice wet meadow prairie that's over in Richland County that was still left, and then some of our really bad, highly invaded WPAs. And our WPAs kind of fell into the moderately to highly invaded category, kind of right in the middle. So as Cami mentioned, there's the standard protocol. We use the belt transect method to measure frequency of occurrence of different vegetative plant assemblages, which are like functional form groups. And we are monitoring annually with permanently established transects. This is just an example of the number and arrangement of transects on the Krause WPA. So you can see these are all different transects through here. One of the benefits that we saw was this method was pretty quick and efficient and could be taught to seasonal biological technicians, which was really helpful as we don't always have personnel to do it. We're fortunate here at Tewaukon. We have a term biotech that has been conducting these surveys since 2009 and is able to do that every year. But not all stations have that, and so the fact that seasonals could pick up this information and collect the information was important. Surveys are collected in mid-July and to the first part of August, and this is so that the vegetation is easier to identify. Then the survey information is entered into a central database. We also keep track of all of the management information that occurs on these units. What treatment did we accomplish? Did we get a burn in? Did we get a graze in? The dates. When did we burn? When did we graze? Then depending whether we grazed or burned, there was other information that was needed. Grazing utilization, how much the area was utilized. Under fire, the fire intensity. So we record this information in this database, but we also record other treatments, like occasionally if there's haying or mowing, herbicide treatments, or anything that might be uncontrollable, like signs of wildfire, overspray from the neighbor, or the neighbor cattle get out. So whatever happens is recorded on units, which is something totally different than what we used to do, which was nothing. So a big step up for us. After information is added somewhere around the first part of September, we get our recommendations for the next year and information regarding our unit, and so that way we can prep. So example, if we get a burn recommendation, we can start prepping our units in the fall, getting them ready for burning, or we can work with if we have a graze, we can work with the grazers to talk about when we would like those cattle in, and that they can kind of know areas that we want them to graze. So you can just take a look. I circled it here. The Krause WPA, the recommendation. This is 2016 information. And if you look at the proportion of native, this is native prairie, it's 21% natives. Then we have 25 smooth brome, 43 Kentucky grass, and then this is just the remainder category. So our vegetative state for the Krause is 0 to 30% co-dominant between the Kentucky bluegrass and the smooth brome. We have a very high defoliation level here. This unit, since we monitored it in 2009, has been either burned or grazed every year. So you can see that since defoliation is 1. We don't have any management restrictions. One of the other nice things that adds a little flexibility for us as local biologists and managers is if there's a unit where we can't burn, or there's some difficulties with grazing or whatever, those restrictions are placed into there. And then, of course, here's our recommended management action. So for 2017, we need to burn within the window. And I know Cami and I weren't going to get too much into the tall grass within the window, but if folks have questions afterward, we can, or somebody can talk about that a little better than I can. But this is an example of the information that we get as biologists and managers on each of our units. Here's the rest of our units, the Laban, which is another WPA, and our Gainer unit, and then the Refuge. Then you can take a look as we can get information over time on our units as well. Not only do we get information to the units specifically for that year, but we can also get information over time. And so we could look at the Krause from 2009 to 16, and we can see what management had been applied and what our vegetative state has been. And also the other, that database is so wonderful. The information that we put in the monitoring, we can dig deeper. They give us the recommendation and they give us the analysis, but there's also the raw data that's in there as well. So if we wanted to go in and look at a specific unit and look at more closely maybe types of vegetation or what's going on, we can do that. So, what we were still always ask me, well, you know, it's been since 2009, how are things working? And for the time I can say, you know what, we are seeing native grasses and forbs and they're expressing themselves on our units, but have data to back it up. So before, you know, it was just you go out, you take a look, and it's like, well, it looks like it's doing better or it doesn't look like it is, but we didn't have any information or data to back it up. So a real big for managers, we what's going on on our units in real time. Monitoring is done that year, and then that information is immediately plugged in and provides the recommendation for the next year. So, you know, pretty huge for us on a local level to get that information in a short period of time. And the analysis is, quite frankly, done for us. Has been great. So achieving our goals. And if remember, the goal of NPAM is to increase native plant composition at the least cost. So I wanted to look at, have we been doing that? So this is just, a graph of just showing this is the proportion of desired native and over time, over the years. And we were just looking, we're seeing a slight positive trend in native prairie cover. And so for us, that's very, you know, that's heartening that the work that we're doing is having, you know, as a possible positive trend here. It took such a long time for our prairies to get into such bad shape that it's also going to take us a while before we, you know, get a bigger picture or maybe see more of a positive trend. So this is really important for us, and then it shows that we are achieving our goal, which is to, you know, increase our natives by doing the least cost. And it's a nice learning focused framework. So, and Todd Grant's on there. Hey, Todd, I'm going to use your rest is death. I preach it all the time. So our mindset, Fish and Wildlife Service, especially back then, folks that have been around, is that, you know, we're going to rest these units for ducks. Well, it really has become almost the death of our prairies. And so when people are worried that we're managing too much or that we're too frequently, you know, I always pull out the rest is death thing, and they don't argue too much. But the NPAM program is really an example of real-world applications. It's an adaptive management framework, and not only in the Fish and Wildlife Service, but also in a larger community. And we are, I mean, I think this project leads the way in how we collect information, how we analyze it. That long-term storage of data is huge. I think that's sometimes looked in as a benefit, but for us, it's valuable. Then all this collaborative work that we're monitoring together and working on projects in this bigger goal is really important for us. I think with that, just some acknowledgments. All of the cooperators, all of the stations that work on this, I know, speaking from experience, that it's not a huge amount of effort for what we get out of it. It's been really great, but it is, you know, having a commitment to doing it. So just some acknowledgments here, but I think I'm going to turn it back over to Cami, and then I think we'd be open for questions. Maybe. Stop sharing. Canada back? Yep.
Yes, questions, Kristine and I would be happy to answer them, or feel free to email us. Both of us are at Fish show through us email addresses, and we'd be happy to sit with you one-on-one or through email. But we'll take a couple minutes, and if you have any questions, please let us know.
Yeah, we have plenty of time for questions, folks, so we'll just get started. Anybody have a question for Cami or Kristine or both?
Cam, and Kristine, this is Max, Post Vandenberg at Northern Prairie. I'm a little bit curious. So you'd mentioned that there were hypotheses that you were testing through this process, and one of the advantages, or one of the touted advantages of adaptive management, is that it allows you to actually measure how much learning is actually going on. I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about what the specific hypotheses were and whether you guys are learning from the data.
Yeah, I'd be happy to at least answer that question briefly on the phone and maybe literally get more in the weeds on it
Sure.
offline sometime if you'd like. We talk about hypotheses. First of all, there's sort of a couple different levels, but essentially when we built the framework, we had to put in some real basic assumptions and about what we believed. Things like if you have a unit dominated by smooth brome, we believe that grading is probably better than fire. So there's some real zoomed out basic assumptions like that we put in, and then it got a little bit more detailed when we started building the state and transition probabilities. There was our quantitative person on this, Jill Gannon, and Moore and Terry Schaefer, came up with a way to have experts really kind of dive in a little deep and get into the specifics of how to measure if we're the probability of moving from a different native prairie state and so on after you burn or graze or do. It was a pretty complex way that I might actually put you on to Jill Gannon for that, Max. But you're leading up to your second question of are we testing those assumptions? We have actually gotten to a point where we are starting to do that, and we do have one really cool thing, and those of you out there who understand adaptive management well, we're at a place where we can replace some of that hypothesized data with real data because we have accumulated enough and are able to put that in. So it's exciting with these long-term things to actually get to a point where you can do that. So I'll stop there, Max, and I'd love to visit with you more offline to get in the weeds further on this if you'd like.
Okay, this is Cami.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Hey, Jerry Sauter. I was just wondering if that database that shows the dispersals and how they're managed is available publicly.
So the that where we enter the data or the outputs of the data?
Well, both, but I'm mostly interested in the outputs. Just knowing this parcel's been this year burned, this year grazed, this year, and this is the effects that we're noting for each different parcel.
Sure. Well, I would tell you it's not something I can just send you a link for a website. If you have a specific interest or something, I would be happy to work with you and get that if that is something that you're interested in.
Okay, sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Andy. I'm with the National Park Service at Fort Union. Did you say that the model actually tells you what you're going to do the next year, or that's something you're doing yourself?
That is, let me just get my, so if you can, I maybe went too fast there. The WebEx catch up here a second. So our decision tool, and Kristine walked through this, the Krauss WPA. Each year, a management recommendation is generated So last September 1st, she got her recommendation, which she was supposed to burn within the window on this waterfowl production area, and that's based on this data and also based on that, again, several things that are built into that pretty sophisticated decision tool. So yes, and we call them recommendations. We always say that it's up to, at the end of the day, it's up to our management staff to do the final critical thinking and so on, but we encourage them as much as possible to implement management recommendation because that's going to be able to best enhance our learning.
Okay, so now grading is a bit of a challenge on an archaeological site like ours. Have you looked at mowing at all, or do you have any thoughts that way?
It's interesting. When we actually have haying as a potential measurement treatment in our tallgrass prairie, which is lumped into this category of defoliate. And it was interesting when we first started this. We write like an entire paper with those of us who work closely with this on, sort of all the interesting human side of doing this. The technical stuff seems to be less complicated than the human side. In the beginning, everyone's like, oh, yeah, we want hang in here, we want this in here, but that is very rarely used. So we really don't have much data on that at all.
What our plan or action now is to mow with the sickle bar, so it just lays it down rather than a mower that leaves the windrow. But then we don't hay it; we just leave it on the ground. And do you have thoughts about that?
I think, and I'm sorry, what you're at Union?
Union Trading Post in the northwest corner of North Dakota, right on the border with Montana.
Okay, good. That helps. That helps me a little bit. Based on what we have learned over the years, I'm a proponent of if, however, you can defoliate, that our native plants evolved with that, and if it's your tool in the toolbox are what you have, and if grazing isn't something you can do, and the best you can do is do that mowing, I'd say use you have available rather than just resting in.
Very good. Thanks.
Problem.
This is Dan Swingen in South Dakota.
Dan?
Hi. I'm wondering if for a wood complex or any other unit in the area has NEPA clearance and or social acceptance of burning been strength?
I would say, and Kristine, you might be actually better to talk about this than me because you're doing the on the ground stuff. I'll start by saying no, it hasn't been a problem for us. It's interesting. We didn't mention this in the presentation, but Audubon has recently joined in and is participating in PAM, and we've recently had some interest from North Dakota Game and Fish, and that same question came up, and that's interesting. To my knowledge, we aren't have issues with that we're good to go for that, and our conservation plans have the necessary NEPA and the compatibility determinations to us to do that. Kristine, do you have anything to add to that response?
Just that in our neck of the woods down here, I can speak for our area. Everybody burns, and so burning is not. We don't get much social pressure, political pressure down here about burning. Of course, we always do get some folks that are concerned about when we burn. For cover, for pheasants in the winter, or for nesting birds in the spring. So I'm not saying that we don't get some of that, but done, I think, a really good job in all of our documentation and our comprehensive conservation plans and our other plans about talking of the bigger picture with burning. And so folks are pretty used to us burning, and so we don't really see that has been a problem for us. We're very fortunate. It's not always the case, I know, in other places.
That's great news. Thank you both.
I'm curious to know a little bit more. So when you guys were working through the setup phase of project, how many different management actions did you guys consider? Like, were herbicides on the table? Was native seeding on the table? Any of those things? And why did you guys arrive at the sort of limited set of actions that you arrived at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to default and say that's a good Jill question that we can talk about offline. But let me give you again the quick Reader's Digest version of that. The basic is we wanted folks generally to be doing. Simply put, we wanted folks to continue doing what they were doing, which was generally burning, grazing, or resting. And, you know, we do have a mixed grass and a tall grass tool. Our tall grass folks, they would test this, what we call in the window, which is trying to target the elongation sage of smooth brome, and then is trying to enhance the growing or warm season native. So we did do some devil in the detail type things with the tall grass, but really we didn't want to ask folks to do too much out of the box stuff because we were concerned that it wouldn't happen. And you know better than me of data hungry models that we wanted to, you know, literally, like I'll use it as an example. We have this really getting this burn and graze in the window. That has been a really tough thing for a lot of interesting reasons. We're going to write a paper on that someday in all of our spare time. But that has been, like, that's a management treatment. I think eventually I mean in the next 5 years, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board a little bit and say, okay, we're really having trouble hitting this window, so should we still call it a burn within the window, or should we back it up to a burn and to that? So really it was, simply put, it was like this to be feasible for folks, and we just wanted them to continue as they always have been is the way we phrase it. And then literally, quote unquote, all they have to do is monitor. It's not like they have to do some new kind of fandangled type of management, whether it be interseeding or whatever it might be.
Okay, thank you.
It's 2:47. We still have time for more questions. If you have them, fire away.
This is Pete Fassbender in Minnesota. Good job, you guys. Really neat presentation here. As far as monitoring, was your monitoring restricted to the vegetative responses, or did you collect any additional ecological data, you know, like invertebrate abundance or diversity or anything like that?
No, we haven't, not associated. There's, again, as we thought about the longevity of this, and even, you know, Max was asking about the management actions, how we,
right,
you know, if you threw everything at the board that you could do, how to get down to some manageable things. And that was really the similar thing that we thought about with monitoring, too. We knew that this has to be able to survive lean budget years as well as flush budget years, and so really wanted to pick a monitoring protocol that, again, like Kristine talked about, that she essentially trained a seasonal employee. She has a term employee who usually does this, but that this would be feasible for that. And I'm not saying there's not interest in doing that, but I think that would be done through a partnership like we had U.S. Geological Survey do some grassland bird work for us on these NPAM units. And so I see that happening as is sort of a side project that is complementary versus being an actual part of the framework.
Right. I figured you didn't, but you all get asked, why is native prairie better? Why is the native vegetation better? Mm-hmm. And it just gives a little bit more information if we have it in our back pocket. No, again, it wasn't a critique at all. I was just out of my personal, so thank you.
I mean,
why don't you spend just a couple seconds talking about some of the benefits of having this huge database and information for future studies and some of the other couple of things that have been worked on with NPAM.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Pete. Those are excellent comments. And we have what's called an advisory team with them who essentially is these are people that are some of the people have moved on, but these are the folks who have been part of this advisory team that wrestle with these things that you brought up, Pete. And one of the things one of the ongoing conversations is how do we make sure that our prairies remain relevant in the ever-changing world and why important. So we wrestle with these things, and we do. Todd Kristine already mentioned him too. Has data from grassland songbird surveys and waterfowl surveys he's done over the years. Showing how we have more gadwall now than we did way back when. Gadwalls are most common duck, whereas the pintail used to be the most common duck. I mean, those types of things. Just as we continue that, remember our long-term history of idleness on our prairies. But I'll also mention what Kristine has asked me or suggested that I mention. At a point, because we do have several years under our belt, that we can do retrospective analyses. So if someone has a question on pollinators, for example, let's say we want to do a pollinator inventory on our NPAM units, we have data essentially since 2010, 2009 in our database that we would be able to take advantage of to make that survey, stronger, that and so on. So, and we are doing some retrospective work right now. I mentioned the abiotic data, and we're also looking at some different questions that some of our the folks who participate in NPAM have, such as, how does my different levels of grazing utilization affect of my outcomes in terms of getting better prairie.
I think that's really, because we always get asked retrospectively why this happened. I mean, I'd like to hear about that.
Sure, that sounds great. I'd love to visit with you sometime, Pete, and I can. Yeah, we could, Rick, if you want us to do some periodic updates, we're kind of in the thick of some of this retrospective stuff right now, but I would say in a year might be a place to do another webinar with some of that.
That'd be great. I kind of want to follow up to that to question a little bit, maybe a different view. So given the time now that you've had to engage this, what do you have specific things you want to add? So let me just throw one out we talked about in the past. Climate modeling, for example. Those types of things. Are there things that you would, if you, of course budgets are tight, but things that you would like to desperately add to this that you haven't been able to do yet? I mean, what were your top two things that you would say if we could have done this to begin with, we'd have been far ahead, or now's the time where we can add a couple of new things?
I think right to some of the abiotic work, like if we could add, we have done some interesting, USGS folks have done, and USGS and Jill Gannon, who recently hired and used to work for USGS, but looked at like how prior year precipitation affects management outcomes, and really the really simple outcome of that is fire is really, really important. Thinking about prior year precipitation, and if you just graze, you aren't making the advancements that you are if you don't include burn, even if it's a burn graze or just a burn treatment. We are getting that type of information, which is really interesting if we could add that. So the challenges of asking our quantitative people, and I think Jill Cannon's on this call too, so she's hearing all the things that we should do and probably pulling her hair. But she knows all this already. But she like static versus dynamic variables in this whole framework can add to the complexity. It's not impossible, but like the preset stuff, we'd have to have a way of pulling that in every year versus using like soils or ecological sites with, those aren't going to change over time. Those should be pretty static. So we are exploring those things. Again, if I had unlimited money, I do think that precipitation variable is important from a whole. If you talk to the folks who are involved in prairie ecology and range management in the Dixon, it seems pretty clear to us that something happened climatically, since probably, when do we say Kentucky bluegrass really took off? Probably late 90s, in the 2000s, like the last 10 to 15 years. So it seems like something happened. Of course, we have these long-term rest issues and whatnot, but we know climate's important. So actually climate, if I was clean for a day, had a bunch of money and had all the quantity of people necessary to help us figure out how to do that, I think that's what I would do.
Thanks. It's 2:55, folks. We're scheduled to go to 3, so we still have time for some more questions if there's others out there.
Hi, this is Paul with the Isaac Walton League. Thanks for the presentation today. You talked a lot about the invasion of bluegrass and brome on the native prairies. Are any other invasive species causing a problem on some of these tracts, and if so, what would those species be?
We definitely, if you remember this, my initial slide on, let me have a way of doing this. Brome and bluegrass, this was actually really, if any of you are thinking of starting a program, it's really doing that inventory of figuring out what out on your prairies was critical. And I know I'm getting to the right slide here, so apologies if you just lost here. So this was really critical to us in helping us frame the problem, Paul, because we talked about as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and if we have Park Service people on here and people from other entities, we spend a lot of time working on our weedy forbs. We've got leafy spurge, a lot of Canada thistle, a lot of those weedy forbs, but it was really this like blew my mind to see that look, like 3% or less of our prairies is that, but look at our cool season invasive grasses. So I think we still have weedy forbs out there on our native prairies, but we do collect data on, these are everything that we collect data on every year, and of course we're focused on the Kentucky grass and smooth brome, but we still are collecting data, and we haven't seen anything earth-shattering. I think we have appropriately framed our problem that these are our two biggest enemies. If you go west, those of you West River listening, you're like, crested wheat's a big problem here, but as you can see across our lands, it's not our big fish problem.
I'll give last shot. Any more questions before we end the webinar for this time? And none, I will say thank you very much to Cami and Kristine for an outstanding presentation. I think there's probably way more information here than we get in an hour, and we'll take you up on your offer at some future time, Cami and Kristine, for an update. But thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and thank you very much for all of you for calling in today and taking advantage of this information. One announcement for those of you that call in regularly for these, we are going to not hold one in July because our July webinar is the day after the 4th, and we figured that a lot of folks would be on vacation about that time, so we will not be having a July webinar. We will resume again in August, and we do a schedule set up now for the rest of the year, and we'll post those topics on our website. So again, Kristine and Cami, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for attending. And with that, so long and have a great day.
Thank you.